The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the defibrillator paddles hitting someone's chest wasn't the worst sound I'd ever heard, not by a long shot. Kandahar had a whole symphony of unpleasant noises all its own. But here, in the middle of perfectly manicured Snapdragon Lane, with Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning petunias wilting slightly from the afternoon sun just a few feet away, the sound felt wrong. Profoundly, hilariously wrong. "Clear!" I yelled, my voice cutting through the tense silence that had descended over the impromptu triage station we'd set up on the public easement. The body on the ground, a portly gentleman in a Hawaiian shirt I vaguely recognized as Mr. Abernathy from down the street, didn't so much as twitch. "Still nothing, Doc," said one of Sarge's nurses, a no-nonsense woman named Maria who looked like she could handle a battlefield and a particularly difficult insurance claim simultaneously. Doc. Right. Force of habit. Technically, my medical license had expired stateside while I was, well, let's just say enjoying the vibrant local culture of several less-than-stable countries. But old habits die hard, especially when someone's life is hanging in the balance and the nearest actual medical professional was likely stuck in traffic on Highway 17. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 hours ago, I was arguing with Brenda, the architectural equivalent of a honey badger in a floral print dress, about the acceptable shade of red for a blood donation drive banner. 3 minutes after she'd smugly declared my perfectly legal, meticulously planned charitable event a blight on the aesthetic sensibilities of Serenity Meadows, I was on the phone with Sarge, setting in motion a chain of events that had culminated in this. A full-blown mobile medical clinic parked squarely on the edge of HOA jurisdiction, a taco truck doing a roaring trade in carne asada, and Mr. Abernathy apparently deciding that the dramatic tension was too much for his ticker to handle. "Okay, let's try again," I said, grabbing the paddles. My mind raced. Abernathy had been one of the first in line to donate blood. He'd seemed fine, if a little too enthusiastic about the free mini-muffins. Then, mid-interview with that overly eager news intern from Channel 8, the one Brenda had undoubtedly called, thinking they'd be crucifying me, he'd clutched his chest and gone down like a poorly aimed clay pigeon. "Clear!" I repeated, and zapped him again. Still nothing. A knot of worry tightened in my stomach. This wasn't part of the plan. The plan involved sticking it to Brenda, boosting community spirit, and maybe getting a few pints of O-negative for Dave's kid. It did not involve performing emergency CPR on a suburban dad, while a local news crew filmed the whole damn thing. "Epinephrine," I barked. Maria was already reaching for the kit. Sarge's team was good, damn good. They moved with a practiced efficiency that spoke of countless drills and high-pressure situations, made Brenda's panicked flapping about unauthorized foot traffic seem even more pathetic in retrospect. As Maria prepped the injection, my eyes flicked over to the small crowd that had gathered. Faces etched with concern, a few whimpering children being comforted by their parents. And then there was Brenda, standing rigid on her perfectly trimmed lawn, her face a mask of conflicted emotions. Was that worry I saw flickering in her eyes? Or just outrage that a genuine emergency was disrupting her carefully curated reality? Hard to tell with Brenda. Her default expression usually hovered somewhere between severe constipation and discovering a rogue dandelion on her property. "All right, stand back," Maria said, administering the shot. We waited, the silence punctuated only by the distant wail of an approaching ambulance, a sound that, under normal circumstances, would be alarming, but right now felt like the cavalry arriving. This whole ridiculous situation started, as most suburban dramas do, with a noble intention and an unreasonable amount of petty tyranny. My best friend Dave has a daughter, Lily, who's got one of those rare childhood illnesses that requires regular blood transfusions. The local blood bank was running low, and Dave was understandably worried. So I volunteered to organize a community blood drive in our little slice of hell, otherwise known as Serenity Meadows. I'm not exactly Mr. Community Engagement. My background leans more towards logistical nightmares and high-stakes problem-solving in environments where curb appeal isn't exactly a top priority. But Dave's like family, and Lily, well, she's a force of nature in glittery shoes. So I filled out the forms, booked the clubhouse, a bland beige box that smelled faintly of stale coffee and disappointment, and even managed to decipher the HOA's Byzantine rules on temporary signage. I thought I had all my bases covered. I even remembered to specify that the banner would be a rather inoffensive shade of blue. Then Brenda happened. Brenda, president of the Serenity Meadows Homeowners Association, possessor of a binder filled with bylaws thicker than a phone book in the pre-smartphone era, and a woman whose life's mission seemed to be ensuring that no resident ever experienced a moment of spontaneous joy. I'd had run-ins with her before. The Great Garden gnome debacle of 22 still haunted my nightmares. Apparently, a ceramic gnome fishing in a bird bath was antithetical to the established aesthetic narrative. The morning of the blood drive, the local blood bank truck, bless their rolling, life-saving hearts, was already setting up when Brenda's golf cart, that aforementioned land shark, silently rolled up. She looked like she'd just swallowed a particularly sour lemon, which, knowing Brenda, was probably her natural state. "Alexander," she'd said, her voice tight, like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. "Brenda," I'd replied, trying to keep the forced cheerfulness out of my tone. "Everything's on schedule. We've got volunteers arriving. The blood bank is ready." I even gestured towards the surprisingly cheerful banner. It was indeed blue. She'd held up a perfectly manicured hand, stopping me mid-sentence like I was a misbehaving Labrador. "I am revoking my approval." My brain stalled. "Revoking? But the paperwork? You signed it on April 17th. I have the copy right here." I'd even color-coded the relevant sections, just in case her attention span was as limited as her sense of humor. She hadn't even glanced at it. There have been unforeseen concerns raised. "Unforeseen? Brenda, this was planned months ago. What concerns?" "The color?" she'd stated, with the gravity of someone announcing the apocalypse. "The red on their logo. It clashes with Mrs. Henderson's autumnal-themed porch decorations." I'd blinked. "It's a blood bank, Brenda. Red is kind of their thing." "Furthermore," she'd continued, her eyes narrowing, "the potential for non-resident foot traffic presents an unacceptable security risk. We have recently amended the bylaws, effective immediately, of course, to address the issue of unvetted community ingress." I'd stared at her, dumbfounded. This wasn't just petty, it was bordering on performance art. "Brenda, it's a charity event, for people who might need blood. Are you seriously saying that the color of a logo and the possibility of someone gasp walking on our public sidewalks is more important than saving lives?" Her lips had thinned. "The integrity of our community's aesthetic and the safety of our residents are paramount, Alexander. This event is cancelled. I suggest you inform the blood bank that they need to vacate the premises immediately." She'd then proceeded to threaten the bewildered blood bank staff and my equally bewildered volunteers with fines and trespassing charges. Faced with Brenda's unwavering commitment to suburban tyranny, the blood bank had no choice but to pack up and leave, their vital equipment rolling away like hope itself. Dave had called me just as the truck was pulling out of the neighborhood. His voice was heavy with disappointment. Lily was expecting the drive. She liked feeling like the community was supporting her. I'd looked at the retreating truck, then at Brenda, who was now giving me a smug little smile, and something inside me had snapped. The nice guy approach had clearly failed. It was time for a different strategy. "Don't worry, Dave," I'd said, my voice deceptively calm. "I'll fix this." I'd walked a few steps, just enough to get out of Brenda's immediate line of sight, and ducked behind Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning, and frankly rather garish, azaleas. Then I'd made the call. "Sarge," I'd said, my voice low and tight with a barely suppressed fury. "It's Alex. You still owe me for that little misunderstanding involving the goat and the generator back in Kandahar." There had been a beat of silence on the other end, followed by Sarge's gravelly chuckle. "Don't remind me. I thought you'd use that get-out-of-jail-free card for something important, like escaping a forced timeshare presentation, not—" "What? Did you finally run out of milk?" "I need a clinic, Sarge. A mobile one. Blood donation setup, 2 nurses, 4 phlebotomists, all the supplies. Needs to be self-sufficient. Power, water, the works. How fast can you get it to me?" Another beat of silence, this one longer, heavier. I could practically hear the gears turning in Sarge's surprisingly sharp mind. "A clinic? Alex? What in the Sam Hill?" I'd quickly explained the Brenda situation, the cancelled blood drive, the sheer, unadulterated pettiness of it all. I could practically feel Sarge's grin widening on the other end of the line. "You want to park a mobile hospital on that witch's doorstep?" he'd bellowed, his laughter echoing in my ear. "I like your style, kid. I like it a lot. As it happens, we just wrapped up a corporate wellness thing over in the next county. Got a fully kitted-out RV, the heel on wheels we call her. Bit of a beast, but she's got everything you need. I can have her rolling your way in, say, 5 hours, give or take a disgruntled intern and a coffee stop." 5 hours. It wasn't 3 minutes, but it was damn fast. The title could take a little creative license, right? 5 hours is perfect, Sarge. Just make sure it's discreet. Discreet for a 40-foot RV, anyway. Next, the location. I'd pulled up the county zoning map on my phone, my fingers flying across the screen. Serenity Meadows was neatly demarcated, a little island of beige conformity. But right at the main entrance, bordering Snapdragon Lane, was a small, oddly shaped patch of land labeled Public Utility Easement. It was technically outside the HOA's jurisdiction, separated by a narrow public sidewalk. Bingo. It wasn't exactly prime real estate, mostly dusty weeds and the occasional discarded fast food wrapper, but it was legally fair game. Power was the next hurdle. Sarge's RV had its own generator, but running that thing for hours would sound like a heavy metal concert in Brenda's backyard. I needed a quieter, more permanent solution for the duration of our little counteroffensive. That's when I thought of Gus. Gus was an electrician I'd hired a few months back to fix a dodgy outlet. He was a grizzled, seen-it-all kind of guy who'd grumbled about the HOA's ridiculous regulations the entire time he was working. "Gus?" I'd said when he answered his phone. "It's Alex from 12 Snapdragon Lane. I've got a creative electrical project brewing, and it involves sticking it to Brenda from the HOA." There had been a long pause, punctuated by the sound of someone taking a drag on a cigarette. Then, Gus's voice, a low rumble of barely contained glee, had filled my ear. "Tell me more, son. Tell me more." I'd explained the mobile clinic, the location, and my need for temporary power. Gus had chuckled. "That old battle axe? She tried to find me once because my work van was parked in my own damn driveway for longer than aesthetically permissible. I'll be there in 20 minutes, and I'm knocking 10% off my rate. Consider it a community service." Gus had arrived in his battered van, a toolbox overflowing with wires and a mischievous glint in his eye. He'd surveyed the utility pole near my chosen patch of public land and grinned. "Emergency temporary event power. Standard procedure. Requires a permit, of course, but I know a guy at the county. We can expedite things for a small administrative fee." Naturally. The fee, I suspected, would be a 6-pack and the satisfaction of watching Brenda's head explode. With power sorted, I needed provisions. People donating blood deserved more than stale cookies. They deserved tacos. I'd remembered seeing a brightly colored food truck, Taco Apocalypse, at the local farmer's market. Maria, the owner, was a whirlwind of energy and delicious smells. "Maria," I'd said when she answered, her voice cheerful despite what sounded like a minor culinary emergency in the background. "How'd you like to have a captive audience of a few hundred people for the rest of the day? Prime location, lots of foot traffic." "Is it legal?" she'd asked, a shrewd businesswoman beneath the sunny exterior. "Perfectly," I'd assured her. "And the best part? It's going to absolutely infuriate the president of the local HOA." There had been a brief pause, followed by Maria's infectious laughter. "My gas tank is full. Send me the address, and tell me what kind of tacos that battle axe prefers, just so I know which ones to accidentally run out of." The pieces were falling into place. Gus was on the phone, charming or possibly bribing someone at the county permit office. Maria was coordinating with her suppliers. I was hammering out a mass email to every resident of Serenity Meadows, a list I'd ethically acquired from a neighborhood directory, announcing the grand reopening of the community blood drive, now located just outside the HOA's precious borders, with complimentary tacos for all donors. The subject line? "Brenda says no to blood, we say go." Then Brenda had seen the email. I'd been watching from my living room window as her golf cart screeched to a halt near Gus's van. Her face, even from a distance, radiated pure, unadulterated fury. The binder of bylaws was clutched in her hand like a weapon. The ensuing confrontation was a masterclass in bureaucratic warfare versus sheer, stubborn will. Brenda, red-faced and sputtering, had marched onto the public easement like she was invading Poland. "Alexander!" she'd shrieked, her voice echoing across the perfectly manicured lawns. "What is the meaning of this travesty?" "It's the rescheduled blood drive, Brenda," I'd said, trying to sound reasonable despite the immense satisfaction bubbling inside me. "Remember? The one you so graciously canceled." "On their property," she'd sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at Gus's van. "Actually, Brenda," I'd said, pulling out my phone to display the county map, "this is public utility easement, not subject to HOA regulations. See the little dotted line? That's the boundary. We're on the good side of the dotted line." She'd flipped open her binder, her eyes scanning the pages with frantic intensity. Section 9, Paragraph B. No commercial vehicles shall be parked within view of common areas for more than 1 hour without prior written approval from the board. "Gus is here under a temporary event permit issued by the county," I'd countered, waving the official-looking document. "And Maria's taco truck has a valid city vendor license, both clearly displayed. Would you like to see them?" Brenda had sputtered something about loopholes and the spirit of the covenants. She'd then taken aim at Maria's brightly colored menu board. Section 14, subsection F. All signage within the community must adhere to a muted, aesthetically harmonious color palette and font. "Again, Brenda," I'd said, my patience wearing thin but my amusement growing. "We are not within the community. We are adjacent to it. And frankly, I find Maria's hand-painted tacos to be a vibrant expression of culinary artistry." Maria, bless her spicy soul, had winked at me and offered Brenda a free sample. Brenda had recoiled, as if offered a vial of poison. Defeated on the bylaw front, Brenda had escalated. She'd started snapping photos with her phone, muttering about fines and lawsuits. "I am calling the police," she'd declared, her voice reaching a truly impressive pitch. "This illegal gathering will be shut down." I'd just smiled. "Please do, Brenda. Saves me the trouble." True to her word, a police cruiser had arrived a short while later, Sirens blessedly silent. Officers Miller and Chen, two patient-looking individuals who seemed intimately familiar with the finer points of suburban disputes, had emerged. Brenda had launched into a frantic, high-pitched monologue about rogue citizens, illegal activities, and the impending collapse of civil society, all due to my blatant disregard for the sanctity of perfectly manicured lawns. When she'd finally run out of steam, I'd stepped forward, my demeanor calm and respectful. "Officers," I'd said, handing them the neatly organized folder. "Here are all the relevant permits and licenses. We're holding a community blood drive, which was unfortunately canceled at the last minute due to aesthetic concerns. We've relocated to this public easement, fully within our legal rights." Officer Miller, a man whose face suggested he'd seen it all and then some, had slowly perused the documents, occasionally glancing from the paperwork to Brenda's still fuming figure, and then back to me. He'd let out a long, weary sigh. "Ma'am," he'd said to Brenda, his voice level, "everything here appears to be in order. They have the necessary permits. This is public land. There's nothing we can do." Officer Chen, meanwhile, was discreetly trying to stifle a laugh behind his hand. The officers had wished us a good day and a successful blood drive, then driven off, leaving Brenda standing there, speechless for once, as a small crowd of curious neighbors, drawn by the commotion, started to gather. It was a glorious moment. The first cracks in Brenda's iron grip on Serenity Meadows were beginning to show. And then, right on schedule, the cavalry had arrived. Sarge's heel on wheels had rumbled into view, a gleaming 40-foot behemoth of medical self-sufficiency. It had backed into the designated spot with a professional hiss of air brakes, dwarfing Brenda's golf cart and, frankly, most of the houses on the street. Sarge himself had emerged, a mountain of a man in a surprisingly cheerful polo shirt, a grin splitting his weathered face. "Alex, you magnificent bastard!" he'd boomed, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to make my teeth rattle. "Knew you had it in you. Now let's draw some blood and stick it to the man, or, in this case, the aggressively floral woman." The sight of Sarge's impressive mobile clinic, coupled with the lingering humiliation of Brenda's public defeat and the tantalizing aroma of Maria's tacos, had been the tipping point. The trickle of curious onlookers had turned into a steady stream of potential donors. Neighbors who had previously only communicated through passive-aggressive notes about misplaced recycling bins were now chatting and laughing as they waited in line. Dave had arrived with Lily, her face lighting up at the sight of the bustling scene. Her hug had nearly cracked my ribs, and the superhero drawing she'd given me, featuring a rather buff figure with my distinctly unimpressive hairline standing proudly next to a giant taco-dispensing RV, was going straight to my fridge. The blood drive itself was a resounding success. Sarge's team was efficient and friendly, the mobile clinic was surprisingly spacious and well-equipped, and Maria couldn't keep up with the demand for her carnitas. Even Gus, perched in a lawn chair next to his humming electrical hookup, looked like a proud father watching his child perform in the school play. And then Mr. Abernathy had gone down. The arrival of the ambulance was a relief. The paramedics, professional and calm, took over, their movements precise and practiced. They worked on Abernathy for what felt like an eternity, the flashing lights of their vehicle casting an eerie glow over the scene. Finally, one of them gave a thumbs up. A collective sigh of relief swept through the small crowd. Abernathy was stable, they said. Likely a combination of heat and excitement. He'd be taken to the hospital for observation. The news intern, wide-eyed and clearly realizing she had a much bigger story than Brenda's initial complaint, had kept filming. I'd given her a brief, factual interview, focusing on the community spirit and the importance of blood donation. Brenda, meanwhile, had retreated to her house, the curtains twitching ominously behind her. The news segment that aired later that evening was, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly the hatchet job Brenda had envisioned. Sarah, the reporter, had framed it as a heartwarming story of community resilience in the face of petty bureaucracy. There were shots of smiling donors, Lily hugging me, Maria handing out tacos, and even a brief clip of Brenda's tearful rant about the autumnal palette, which, thanks to the magic of the internet, had already been remixed into a surprisingly catchy techno song. The aftermath was interesting. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Emails flooded my inbox. The Serenity Meadows Facebook group became a battleground, with Brenda's supporters, a dwindling number, mostly consisting of her immediate family, and that one guy who always wore socks with sandals, facing off against a growing chorus of residents who were tired of her micromanagement. An online petition calling for an emergency HOA meeting and a vote of no confidence in Brenda's leadership garnered hundreds of signatures within hours. The emergency meeting was a sight to behold. It had to be held outside, on the very patch of lawn where Brenda had once held court, because the clubhouse couldn't accommodate the sheer number of people who showed up. Brenda's attempt to defend herself, a rambling monologue about upholding standards and the dangers of rogue medical clinics, was met with a chorus of polite but firm rebuttals. The vote was swift and decisive. Brenda was out. Then came the truly surreal part. In the stunned silence that followed the vote, Mrs. Henderson, yes, the same Mrs. Henderson whose petunias had apparently been traumatized by the color red, stood up and nominated me as the interim HOA president. I'd stared at her, dumbfounded. Me? But Dave had clapped me on the shoulder, a wide grin on his face. You broke it. You bought it, buddy. The crowd had erupted in applause. Faced with the overwhelming, and frankly terrifying, enthusiasm of my neighbors, I'd reluctantly agreed. How hard could it be? I figured I could at least try to make sure no one else got fined for their choice of garden gnome. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of surprisingly tedious paperwork, surprisingly passionate debates about the acceptable length of front yard hedges, and surprisingly heartfelt thanks from my neighbors. The community felt different, lighter, more like a community. Tonight I was sitting at my kitchen table, a half-eaten takeout pizza cooling in its box, reviewing a proposal for a community fall festival. Pumpkin patch on the clubhouse lawn, hay rides through the neighborhood, route carefully planned to avoid Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning roses. Even a chili cook-off. It was nice. I picked up a pen and looked at the signature line at the bottom of the proposal. HOA President. With a small, almost imperceptible smile, I signed my name. Then I walked to the window and looked out at Serenity Meadows. The houses still looked the same. The lawns were still perfectly manicured. But somehow the air felt a little less suffocating, a little more free. All right, Serenity Meadows, I muttered to myself, taking another slice of pizza. Let's see if we can't make this place a little less serene, and a little more like home. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump I heard now was just the bass from someone's slightly too loud car stereo driving down the street, and it sounded almost pleasant. Almost.